Once again, Shabbat Shalom. It's nice to be back on the Bima. It's been a few weeks over the course of winter break, and my remarks tonight will take up the theme of persistence in resistance to tyranny. They are composed in line with what the 20th century Christian theologian and great outspoken opponent of the Nazis, Karl Barth, once said, that a sermon should have the Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other. And wherever you get your news, and I hope you're getting it from as many different and credible sources as you can, one could easily conclude that we live in unprecedented times for the sheer volume and diversity of soul-wrenching issues before us. How then to choose among this week's headlines alone? From Mississippi to Minnesota to Iran. I could take up any one of these in depth and keep you here until Tu B'Shvat. Or I could try something novel. I could take up all of them together and make my point in 10 minutes. You will be relieved to learn that I have endeavored in the direction of the latter. I begin with a challenge to my own claim that we are living in unprecedented times, a statement which, given the nature of time and change, could be accurately claimed at any moment in human history. I refute the notion that we live in unprecedented times in the spirit of Kohelet, whose opening chapter of the book, also known as Ecclesiastes, memorably records, "Only that shall happen that has happened, only that occur that has occurred. There is nothing new beneath the sun." Nothing new beneath the sun indeed. For what we have witnessed this week, from Mississippi to Minnesota to Iran, has been seen before. And that takes us to the verses we have just heard from the Torah reading for this Shabbat, Parashat Va'era. To set the stage, Va'era marks the stunning turning point in the narrative of Israelite bondage, when God responds to the suffering of the slaves, and with Moses as messenger, begins their liberation. To Moses, God declares, "Say therefore to the Israelites, I am Adonai. I will deliver you from the hardship of the Egyptians and save you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary judgments. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. I will bring you to the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and give it to you for an inheritance. I, Adonai." It is what happens immediately after this inspirational charge that particularly interests us, the verse that concluded Cantor's chanting. Vaidaber Moshe ken el bnei Yisrael. Moses told just as much to the Israelites. V'lo shama'u el Moshe. But they would not listen to Moses. Mikotzer ruach u'mei avodah kasha. Idiomatically, their spirits crushed by brutal slavery. Literally, they would not listen to Moses out of shortness of breath, the wonderful Hebrew phrase kotzer ruach, and brutal slavery. Tyranny takes your breath away. It suffocates the body and stifles the spirit. Consider what this passage teaches us about the natural response of people to oppression, brutality, and intimidation under threat of harm. The effect on body and breath, flesh and spirit, the effect of trauma and terror when brought upon human beings by literal tyrants or lone wolf terrorists or states acting with power too unrestricted to menace the weak, with not only the threat but also the use of force against the defenseless. In a sense, the arsonist who incinerated a Reformed temple with its Torah scrolls in Jackson, the arsonist who, by the way, less reported, but tried the same this week in Germany, the armed officers who have maimed and intimidated and even killed civilians, and the Revolutionary Guardsmen who mowed down protesters by the thousands on the other side of the world, may have acted from starkly different motivations in vastly different settings and circumstances. But the intended effect on their victims and on those of us who would naturally sympathize with their victims is one and the same: to make it hard to breathe, to crush not just body but spirit. Moreover, we learn from Torah in the very next verse that the effect is often contagious, afflicting not just the masses but also their Moses. The Israelites would not listen to me, he says to God in a panic. How then should Pharaoh heed me who gets tongue-tied? This too strikes a chord as old as time. Even leaders in the face of unrelenting brutality may for a time lose heart, lose hope, lose their way. It happened to Moses. It happened, it seems important to note, on this weekend of all weekends, to MLK. In his 1958 book, Stride Toward Freedom, The Montgomery Story, King recounts a personal crisis during the Montgomery bus boycott in January 1956, after he received a late-night threatening phone call in the context of widespread violence and intimidation. Sitting alone at his kitchen table, King poured out his despair. He wrote, "I am here taking a stand for what I believe is right, but now I am afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. I am at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I've come to the point where I can't face it alone." In some sermons later on, when King retold his experience, he phrased it similarly. "Lord," he'd say, "I'm down here trying to do what's right. But Lord, I must confess that I'm weak now. I'm faltering. I'm losing my courage. Now I am afraid, and I can't let the people see me like this, because if they see me weak and losing my courage, they will begin to get weak." It's a mutually reinforcing cycle of despair. That is what tyranny does to the spirit, to freedom movements everywhere. King's hour of despair had its own precedents, Moses, of course, but also Frederick Douglass, who spoke of his brutal treatment under the slave breaker Edward Covey. "Mr. Covey," he wrote, "succeeded in breaking me. I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. My natural elasticity was crushed. My intellect languished. The disposition to read departed. The cheerful spark that lingered about my eye died. The dark night of slavery closed in upon me, and behold, a man transformed into a brute." After the 1892 lynching of 3 close friends in Memphis and facing death threats that forced her to flee to the north, the great activist and journalist Ida B. Wells Barnett wrote, "I felt like one banished from home and friend. The shock was so great that for weeks I could neither eat nor sleep." In her diaries, Wells would recount periods of deep discouragement and loneliness in her solitary quest, feeling the burden of apathy and inadequate support from the Black community and allies alike. There's nothing new under the sun. But of course, the Torah portion, and moreover, the story of the Jewish people, does not end with Moses in retreat or defeat. Because our God does not back down from a setback, because our God does not give up in the face of human error or evil, no matter how great or how grave, our God does something extraordinary in the next verse. God summons for Moses a lifeline. Aaron, his brother, his mouthpiece, his ally and supporter, the breath to Moses' shortness of breath. Moses needed a wingman, just like Sloan asked for Rebecca to come up and chant the Ve'ahavta with her tonight. Sometimes things that are hard to do alone are made possible when we do them together. And therefore God reminds Moses, and God reminds us, that in the face of terror and tyranny, we never need go it alone, no matter how lonely the work may feel. And so arm in arm, and breath adding to breath, the brothers press on, and the great and violent confrontation with Pharaoh begins that will, by the end of next week's portion, lead to liberation. I read today's passage and I think about the passage of time and travail for our people and for hurting people everywhere. people short of breath and crushed in spirit. I wonder what this passage meant to the Jews living in Babylonian exile or under Roman occupation, to our ancestors expelled from Spain or forced into the ghettos and the camps. And I wonder, too, what this passage might mean to us in today's frightening America and today's fractured world that has just crossed over the threshold of 2026 to greet a year shrouded in anxiety and uncertainty, yes, but also possibility and undying hope. I wonder all this. And I remember that through it all, ours is a God who does not give up on humanity. And even more, we are a people who don't give up on God's children either. Shabbat Shalom.